Hello, everybody, and welcome to our second BYMP mentorship. I have someone really special coming in today, someone I'm really excited to talk to, and someone who has insight on something relevant today. Our guest today is a constituency to the leader of the Ontario NDP. He's an experienced government and stakeholders relations specialist, community organizer, and health equity advocate with over 10 years experience working with public officials at all levels of government. Lyndon knows what drives conversations, why too often the status quo remains, and what motivates change. Whether it's organizing local discussions with Hamilton's healthcare union leaders or publicly calling for race-based data in healthcare, Lyndon is passionate and vocal about addressing health inequities and anti-Black racism. Earlier this year, Lyndon was covered by the Hamilton Spectre on experiential bias in healthcare. As a patient advisor at Hamilton Health Sciences, he is encouraging folks to have the uncomfortable conversation on race and health. Looking forward to talking to and just a really a guy who's up all the time. I'd like to introduce our mentor, Lyndon George.
Good evening, Chance. Thank you for having me here today. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming out. I really appreciate it. I look forward to having a discussion today for the youth and for the future on COVID-19. Our communities, our communities are hurting right now, and so we've got a lot of questions. And I look forward to it. So thank you again for coming out. Thank you again for the time. Today I think to start it off, I think it's best if we start off a little bit of background on yourself, just so that we can get the ball rolling on how you came here. So I would like to know, maybe we can just start simple. Can you tell me a bit about your experience as a Black kid growing up here in Hamilton?
Yeah, absolutely. When I look at all the incredible work that HCCI is doing, I believe that is something that I know as a young man here in Hamilton. I would have very much been appreciative to have that kind of mentorship program that you all are organizing and that kind of support network. So I want to just say thank you to the team at HCCI for the work that you do to not only educate our young people in our community, but to educate our community as a whole. When I look around, there is a voice that you have, and it's one that's important. So I want to say that up front, that you guys are doing great work over there, and keep it up. And so, yeah, a little bit about me with regards to my experience here in Hamilton and growing up. I grew up in Hamilton Mountain, was born and raised there, and then had an opportunity and went to elementary school here. I did leave and go to university in Ottawa, so I took some time away and did my undergrad in Carleton in Ottawa, and then that calling to come back home and be a part of my community was something that I wanted to do. And when you're 17, 18 in Hamilton back then, the jobs weren't around. There wasn't that swath of opportunity, and you had to go out there and, in my opinion, and kind of just try and find yourself in a way, and then come back home. And that's something that I'm grateful to be able to find a space where I am here now. And it's a pleasure to just kind of talk a little bit around that experience. As being a young Black man, oftentimes it was growing up here, you were the only, there wasn't, if you had more than, in my elementary school, 4 or 5 Black kids out of, 500, that was notable. It wasn't until I saw, wasn't like you had Black teachers. It wasn't as if you had, Black doctors. You weren't seeing that in the community growing up. So, the first real person who I saw with stature and clout and was able to walk, and it was Lincoln Alexander. And I'll never forget that day of just seeing him and feeling in awe as a young man of and what that felt like to see him and where he was. And you know, I would say that that was something every time I walked by a corner where I saw him on that first day, I still remember what that meant to me. And so when I talk about your program, that inspirational program that you guys are providing, it really does matter because it sets the bar for saying you can become something more, and to highlight some of the issues that are preventing our young Black youth from being able to reach and accomplish those goals. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. You know, you mentioned Lincoln Alexander, and you know, as a young Black man myself, I look to Lincoln. I never got the opportunity to meet him. I can only imagine what you know, that's like, and so I think we should. I want to ask you just a bit more about that. Who were your mentors growing up? You know, your Black mentors, or even just your mentors, that brought you to the man that you are today. You know, you're very well spoken. You have social advocacy. Was there other people other than Lincoln Alexander, or was Lincoln Alexander the guy for you? Who's mentors that you looked up to that brought you here?
You know, I'm going to be really honest with you. One of the mentors that I had, I was very fortunate to have was my sister. My sister is 11 years older than me and was born in Trinidad and came to Canada at the age of 7 and had encountered the educational system in a way that, you know, as a young child with an accent, and being brought into a whole other environment of not seeing someone that looked like her, but having in this, you know, a very, you know, white-centered world. It was different for her. And so growing up, I had someone who had to face those challenges head on, and would often give me the kind of background and knowledge and understanding that I didn't understand until I got a little bit older. And I was very grateful for it. You know, I remember, you know, and when you're young like that, you kind of think, you know, why is it always about, you know, I just like, what are you like? Life doesn't need to be that serious. Why are you pointing it that way? But I would see her reading these books about Black economic empowerment. I would see her, and this is my sister, you know, you know, as a teenager, talking about, you know, more than, and giving me a sense of, you are like, always know you are more than what they paint you to be, you know? And she left at the age of, so I was in grade 4, and my sister went to Kenya, and she went over there to teach for a year. And during that time, we were, you know, email wasn't a thing back then. And we were, you know, she would write me letters and I would write back, and I would hear these stories, and her experiences of being in Africa and trekking through Tanzania, Malawi, Mozambique, and kind of going through that. And it helped orient me about, you know, the pride in Black culture, and knowing that, and my sister's journey of why she went there. And it really, I mean, it took me, you know, and her talking to me about, you know, Haitian Revolution, different things that you just don't get that in our educational system in Canada. And so I would say I was really fortunate. And if she's watching this video, you know, I'm never going to be able to let this down now, because my sister will be like, so you never told me this story. But anyway, I digress.
I feel honored that you got to crack that story. I wanted to know, is your the firstborn daughter in, like, because I saw this tweet that said firstborn immigrant daughters need to unionize, and you know, because they carry a lot of families and the work amongst siblings. You know, me working the COVID-19 unit and seeing these things, I can totally agree. So, you know, sister, if you're watching, yeah.
You know, and then and the other one I would say, I mean, Chance, I just want to jump back in there and just say, you know, and just my mom, I mean, a single Black mother, you know, raising 2 kids on her own. And those were the kind of, you know, local, you know, just if you're asking me about where that kind of came from. And then I would often spend summers in Brooklyn, because we had a lot of family in Brooklyn. And then as our parents would say, they would send me back home. So they would send me to Trinidad on summers as well. And so there would be this kind of cross-cultural experiences of being in Brooklyn, being in Trinidad, growing up here in Hamilton, and just realizing, like, you know, how these worlds intersect and around, and experiencing, you know, things like, as developed as Trinidad was as a young man growing up, you know, coming from here, and feeling like, oh, you could leave the light on, but back home, someone would be like, teaching you these values of like what it meant about sometimes when, as a young man, I would be like, why does the water always go in the morning? And, no matter where you are. And it was just a part of life. And here it taught me sometimes about like taking natural resources for granted and that kind of economic, environmental stewardship and things like that. And that's the kind of roots of around just being around my family and teaching me some of those things as I was a young man growing up.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Mothers too, that's beautiful. So I want to kind of switch gears here a little bit. We've talked about your upbringing, and before I get into COVID, I want to talk about this shift. I'm fortunate enough, I've heard about your work. I've come to watch you speak, and I've read myself. But just for maybe the people who are unfamiliar, can you just tell us a little bit about your turn into advocacy, patient advocacy, and that as a moment, as a process, and how you've come here. So we know a bit about your upbringing, but about Lyndon, say, if I could ask that.
Yeah. So are you referring to like on the healthcare advocacy side, but sorry, Chance, just break it back down here for me.
Yes. I know that your advocacy. Sorry. I should preface that Lyndon's advocacy spreads far past just healthcare. But as a member of the Hamilton Health Science Board, as a patient advisor, and have advocacy in the healthcare sector. Yeah, I want to know specifically in that as we segue into talking about COVID-19.
Yeah, I mean, on the advocacy end, for me, my healthcare story is kind of documented in the Spectator a little bit around my anti-Black racism and my need to and why I felt the need to kind of come out and call it out. And this was, just around the time when COVID had started to, we're into that year anniversary of where we are when, global pandemic was declared. But I would say to many individuals that Black healthcare advocates especially have been raising these alarms and health inequities in our healthcare system for years. And it took a pandemic for people, for our healthcare and sometimes for our public officials to start to really recognize the disparities in it. And my story isn't unique. And the only difference here is that there are many stories like them, but oftentimes they don't get told. And so there's this disbelief in our healthcare system that anti-Black racism doesn't exist. There are these other disparities. They're not really linked to racism, and they are. And so I'll often say grief has to be seen to be believed, and it's through that story that or someone recording in their ER their experiences that you will hear the, oh my goodness, I can't believe, but you need to believe. And so my journey kind of comes out of that experience and the knowledge that I've learned kind of working in government and understanding how, bit by bit, the public healthcare system works, how you kind of hold it accountable, where the levers you need to speak to. And, I will say in a public healthcare system that there is that ability to be able to ask those poignant questions, both of your elected official, but also I would say of your public health board, of your hospital administration, right? Like these are large budgets. I mean, the two largest budgets in the Ontario economy, the two largest segments in the budget are healthcare and education. And so we spend money on it. And so as individuals, we need to be able to make sure that it's being responsive to us. You only look at our long-term care home system to understand the value that we're getting, and what COVID has and how COVID has impacted that. And the constant call from healthcare workers, frontline PSW saying, the system is not working, but we haven't listened to them. And too often, it's racialized workers who are underpaid and in this line of work who don't get the recognition, but are asked to do even more. And so we're having that conversation now, a conversation we should have been having, years ago.
Yeah, and I like how you bring up, the network in regards to holding these systems accountable, and how it's not, thought, and how, there are multiple ways in which we can hold the healthcare system accountable. I just wanted to, while we talk about COVID, we know that COVID has exacerbated these in our community. You mentioned racialized staff workers being underappreciated. Can you dive in a little bit more, to, what you're seeing right now, what about right now, for our Black communities, and where your voice is concerned right now, and what you're thinking about right now?
As the vaccine, the website's going to go live on Monday, on the 15th, essentially for the province. And we need to understand that it's not as simple as just turning on a switch, and everyone can just call in. And people will talk about, you've heard the experiences right now of individuals who have been waiting hours and calling to get through and to get vaccinated. And one of the things my concern right now is that what I saw today in the legislature. And what do I mean by that? So you have an MPP, Saul Mamawaka, so apologize if I'm saying his name incorrectly at the end there, that stood up today and was accused of jumping the queue to get vaccinated. And what he was really doing was trying to dispel myths in his community and to tell his community that it is safe to take this vaccine. And that's an important part of what we need to be doing in order to make sure that, marginalized, racialized, Indigenous communities are thought of in this vaccine rollout. But today the premier, came out and accused him of jumping the queue. And it comes from this, very much a view of a lack of understanding of the disparities in our community and the lack of trust in healthcare around vaccinations and the historical aspects around it. We could talk about, the Tuskegee experiment. We could talk about many things about, how oftentimes in communities of color, we feel like, am I a part of this experiment? Like, is this what it is? And so there's a lot of misinformation happening right now about the vaccine. And I'm not here to propagate that. What I am trying to say here is we need our elected officials, our leaders, we need our leaders within our own communities to be able to speak truthfully about their hopes. And we also need to acknowledge where we are on some of the hesitancy around it and how do we address it? Because that is something that's out there. So when you ask me about what my concerns are, is that there's a lot of disinformation. You only have to open your WhatsApp and say, who is this individual who's just sent me something about this vaccine, and how quickly it spreads. And we need to talk about it and have and help educate our community about the benefits to it and to dismiss and try to get to the root of it as well. I know I see a question in the corner from Kojo, and around any thoughts on how the vaccine rollout can respond to communities that have been impacted. And I think they need to have a specific plan. They need to have a specific plan that involves communities that are impacted disproportionately, that is created that way. And to the, and I think our healthcare community recognizes that. I would say that, we need to understand how monumental sometimes these tasks are. So if you're thinking you need 5 people on a COVID hotline, you need 500, right? Like you gotta do the heavy lift. You gotta get it up. And so it's not just hiring one person to be your ambassador into the community, to get out there and to knock on doors. You need to mobilize and organize like how we do on elections and get out there on a doorstep and be like, we need you to understand what is happening. And here we are. We know in our and so I'm going a bit on here, but there is this real, because if not, we fall back into the queue and people, will just be saying, I can wait. I'll wait until somebody else. I'll wait another year. I'm not too sure about this. We need to help people to understand that they are valued and that we want them, if they, to answer their questions and help them to get to where they need to be, just like we would, when that time comes around election season. And I say that because that's the experience I have as an organizer, right? And not to politicize it, but to say we need to mobilize and organize like we would when those things matter.
No, absolutely. Absolutely, and I think it's okay that, we look at it from these organizing point of view, because, this is, we like that is what the community, looks like mobilized. And so, we can see the power of that, and we can see the benefit in regards to, helping our own communities, organizing. I think that's a really, really amazing insight. And I just wanted to, we kind of went over it about this hesitancy in the Black community. We talked about the Tuskegee experiment, and these are concepts that were honestly, all of them were, some of them knew, some of them weren't. I understood the hesitancy, but once researching it even more and understanding, I could see why this was like this. I was wondering if maybe you could to the Black hesitancy amongst the community, but more importantly, either than going, you mentioned going into the communities, but how do we foster this sense of trust in our own healthcare system? And is it possible? And is it simply a matter of us to our communities? Who's the onus on, and how can we foster this trust, further, so that it's not just a plan for a vaccine rollout, but a vaccine rollout is accepted by our communities. Is this a possibility?
Absolutely, I do. I mean, you're always going to have individuals who aren't are going to be skeptics about things, but there are a lot of people within our community as well who understand the benefits to it, and are and are engaged and want to be in the queue. And we need to build off of that positivity. We need to educate. We need to be able to knock on a door in our communities where people have have had experiences similar to mine in a healthcare system at times where it breeds mistrust. We need to support them, not only when it's a vaccine rollout time, but also at a time when they're, when they feel like they've been at an ER room and not received the care, or that they're not getting referred to, or getting referred time and time again, but never really being heard. Like, we don't just need to do it at this time. We need to do it all the time. And that builds trust and resiliency, so that when they have that rapport with, myself or you, that they can rely on these voices and say, no, here's what we're going to do, and here's how we held the system accountable, and it improved it. And so we can't just dispel their fears. We need to listen to them, number one. And number two, we need to be able to roll up our sleeves at times and understand the data. I think, pharmaceutical firms and a lot of the research that happens needs to acknowledge that they need to be doing more around including individuals of color in their in that process, so that people can say, no, in the sample size, we did do significant research into racialized communities as well. But they need to acknowledge that and build that into some of their work that they're doing, not just when it's a global push to get the vaccine. And so there are many more people who you should have on here who have medical degrees and backgrounds in medical research to answer that question. But as an organizer and as someone who's just an equity advocate, I would say that we need to be doing more to help people have the conversation, have it, and be able to say, what can we do? What do you need? And where can we meet them?
Thank you for that insight from, hesitancy versus trust, hesitancy versus communication. Yeah. Absolutely. This is a perfect segue. Thank you for offering that insight. The patient board advisor on, a patient experience, and someone who has had that experience and, is holding the healthcare system accountable. I think it's really important. So thank you. But, as we, close this off, we have a few minutes left. I, want to switch gears again from, now COVID-19 back to the political sphere, and just, talk a little bit about joy, about motivation, keeps you going. So before we get there, how get into working with Andrea, and, what's your favorite part about that? And if you want, what's your least? So just, tell us a little bit about that. Maybe about what your day like and how it came about here. Yeah.
I think when you grow up, your experiences in life help guide you. And I grew up in, here in Hamilton, in community housing at a particular time where housing was being built in, this would have been, in that kind of 90s period. And so there's a bit of, we end up, my family and I, in community housing at a particular time, but we end up moving into like a brand new townhouse that had been built. Like it was, this kind of surreal moment of moving into this kind of environment, and the mayor was there to open up this brand new housing, unit. And it was, I just remember being a kid, I think at least like maybe 11 or 12, and thinking the mayor's here. I've never met the mayor, and he's here. And this is kind of a profound moment because he brought a cake, he did everything. And as a kid, I was like, you took pride in your neighborhood. And so I always kind of looked at it and understood the benefits of having a place that you could call your own, that was like, provided a safe, healthy environment and a community. And so, you ask about the activism, but, it often comes from those experiences. And I often say you live it, you know it, because that drives you to make that change possible. And so, housing to me is critical in a community where we see the cost of living going up and up, and the ability for people to say, I could have been able to work a part-time job, or a minimum wage job, and still be able to afford my rent, and now you can't. And so, you have communities saying here, how am I supposed to make this work? And so some of that advocacy and how do I come into this is just through my lived experiences, and knowing that if we're not elevating our voices at the ballot box, if we're not talking about these issues in our community, then we're missing out a whole swath of people who aren't being heard. And so when I was at university, so I ended up going away to university, and because at 16, my wisdom teeth were coming in, and I was too, I guess, I say the ums here because, you always want to be, when you're sharing a personal story, you're like, do I really want to tell that? And maybe I should. So, my wisdom teeth are coming in like my grade 12 year, and I know we don't have dental coverage right now because, just because of our circumstances. And I was like, I would be in my class and just feeling this pain, but not trying to show it because, that's a big expenditure when you don't have dental care, and you don't know, you don't want to put that burden onto your family around it. So I end up going to university, and the first thing I do is like, I have a dental plan when I'm in university, and I go to the dentist on campus, and I go in there and I get my wisdom teeth removed, and I'm like, hallelujah. And then the following year, that like the plan changes on campus, and I'm like, what happened? Like these other things that I was getting, the cleanings and all these, like it's not a part of it anymore. And so I walked into my student union office on campus and was like, I need to talk to you about this plan, and I need to understand why it changed, and I need you to talk to me about it. And I mean, I had been thinking of, these are the critical things that we ask in communities when we know that these social programs benefit us. And it was me kind of like going through this process in university of like, yeah, no, this is impacting. And if I'm not raising this issue now in a plan that I pay into, someone else like me with my experiences is never going to know, is not going to be able to get their wisdom teeth removed or their teeth cleaned that many times. And I know how beneficial it is. And it started me to get active in student politics, and from there become, and just kind of always have that passion for social justice and issues. And so when I come back to Hamilton and there's an election, I'm like, what do I need to do, and where do you need help? And in Hamilton Mountain, where I grew up, I had the honor and privilege to work with MPP Monique Taylor and get her elected for the first time. And that's where it kind of started off there.
Yeah, amazing. That's amazing story. I didn't know that you worked with and I think you bring up a really important points there, especially when you're talking about what's motivating you is coming from your own personal experience, and as someone who personally feels that a lot of my advocacy comes from something personal. I think it's really important that you do share that. So thank you for sharing that. Is what I was trying to say. Also, I just wanted to ask again. We talked about what has gotten you here, you know, what drove you here, but I want to know not what motivates you, but what has sustained you. And also, sorry, before I ask this question, I just say I just got a little flustered because you brought up a really important healthcare and health plans within the university. And I just want to make a point to any of the youth that may be watching this, who may be in university, is to look at that plan and to see what your university is doing, because a lot of universities, you know, including mine, had issues with that, especially in COVID-19. You know, things are changing. People are plans, you know, a lot of, so look into that, and you might have, you know, you might end up a story similar to Lyndon George's in regards to how angry you might become, because some of the stuff that some of the universities are doing should not be happening. And a really important point, and anyone who's watching should also let. So yeah, so just my last question to you is, you know, we talked about what motivates you, but what sustains you, Lyndon? What does self-care look like for you? You know, how do you take care of yourself? Political activists, we know that we can get burnt out and we can get tired and we can get upset. And so what keeps sustained, and how do you stay in the fight? And, you know, what sustains you?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think, you know, COVID has taught us all about where we are. I mean, working remotely and changing the environment where we work, and usually going to those to our regular environments, and how COVID has challenged us to think about how we are living, and are we living in a mindful way, in a way that cares for our health in a real meaningful way. And one of the things that I would often say is that meditation, taking that time in your day to really set that time aside for your own kind of thoughtful, you know, reflection. And, you know, I would say I need to do more of it, but it's something that I try and do and incorporate into my day, whether it's 15 minutes or 20 minutes, to just kind of have that. It's something that you know, it comes from a background as a young kid. You know, I would always, I would say that I come from a very spiritual family at times, right? And so, you know, that spiritualness, that ability to rely on that faith sometimes is really important. So to people who have that, you know, seek it and always find that safe harbor in those things that bring you joy. I think for me, it is that connection with family. I think it reminds you about the things that are really important, to make time for those people who you love, and to be around them, because they are your biggest advocates, and they and will keep you grounded in so many ways. And, you know, I would also say I would like to admit that the stairs of Hamilton have often been my place where I go, where, you know, you can always feel like you can run from the bottom from the top. And I live in Corktown, just outside of Corktown, right on the border of Beasley and Corktown. And so having the Wentworth Stairs is that place where I just kind of can go and feel like I'm all my struggles, all my energy I can put into those Wentworth Stairs. And I really do enjoy them. And the problem now is that I feel like in Hamilton, everybody does that now. Before, it was like, this was like a hidden gem. Now, you know, you're on the stairs and everybody else is doing the same thing. So, but yeah, that's the one thing that I really enjoy getting out to. And then, and just finding that time to meditate and read. I've started to do that more now during COVID than I did before. And it's really enlightened me a lot to just be able to do the things that I enjoy. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for that answer. You know, meditation, specific you even gave, doing the mountain climb. You know, these are all great tips that I hope people watching and myself will be writing down, because I hope that, you know, I have, you know, the sustain and the motivation in one day be, you know, as incredible as an advocate as you, Lyndon. Thank you for coming. I'm going to put your social medias on the screen for watching. Follow you. I'm also cognizant of your time. Thank you so much, Lyndon, for coming. I appreciate you speaking to the children also before the session happened. Yeah, and I hope you have a great day or night now. Have a good evening. And I'm sorry about the technical difficulties, but I'm happy they were able to figure it out.
Chance, you're amazing. Keep doing what you're doing. You're a young leader in this community, and you're going to be a future leader to all of us here. So keep doing what you're doing, man. I'm really proud of you and all the work at HCCI. It's been a pleasure to be with you here tonight.
Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for watching. And I'm going to end the stream. Bye guys. See you guys Tuesday where we'll mentorship spotlight. Bye everyone.